That is going to be a slap in the face to every hardworking American who works hard and plays by the rules, and it'll especially be a slap in the face to people that have immigrated legally to this country.
The Biden administration is allegedly, and I say allegedly because a lot of it's on sources of media and so on, but across the board right now, a lot of different outlets are talking about it. The Biden administration is looking to pay hundreds of millions of dollars or even more to illegal aliens who have come into this country, who feel that they were hurt in some way by Trump's harsh border policies. It seems to be the case. This is focused on the allegations of family separation. I'll get into the details of that because the family separation issue was mainly because, well, the illegal aliens were using children, trafficked children, as tokens to get into the country, and then manipulating them while they were children being trafficked, who were sometimes not the biological children of the people they were with. They were tools of the coyotes, the human traffickers. And of course, the news went wild with it, claimed that kids were getting separated, claimed there were kids in cages. Turned out that was fake. Turned out that was from the Obama administration. We'll get into the details on this. But there's a big organization now trying to get these different kids, they're saying, to sue the United States. And the ACLU is currently working on this, and they're talking about $400,000 or more per family, sometimes even more depending on the case. And well, as Americans are looking to go out of business, as Americans are looking to go into new lockdowns, as we're facing a financial crisis, as we're facing the debt ceiling, we may end up paying, well, hundreds of millions of dollars to illegal aliens who feel offended on the way they were treated as they illegally entered this country. But first off, let's talk about what's happening with Biden looking to pay the illegal aliens using your taxpayer money. It says here, U.S. in talks to pay hundreds of millions to families separated at border. And this is according to Wall Street Journal. It says here, government is considering payments of $450,000 per person affected by Trump administration's zero tolerance policy in 2018 for asylum seekers illegally crossing the border. The Biden administration is in talks to offer immigrant families that were separated during the Trump administration around $450,000 a person, according to people familiar with the matter. Keep in mind, they're citing anonymous sources, but they're saying, according to people familiar with the matter, Wall Street Journal tends to be among the better of organization of the mainstream media that tends to cite, unnamed sources. We'll see how accurate it turns out to be, but this is what they're saying. Now, they're saying, according to people familiar with the matter, as several agencies are working to resolve lawsuits that have been filed on behalf of parents and of children who say the government subjected them to lasting psychological trauma. Now, folks, if you're being trafficked, if you're a child and you're being trafficked across an international border, you can expect to have your traffickers arrested, and you can expect to be separated from your traffickers. Those traffickers may be your parents in this case, just going by law. And if you're violating the law, typically you're going to be arrested and separated from the people you were arrested with. One of the issues you have is with large-scale, hundreds of thousands of people, mass illegal immigration, is that, of course, some people are legitimate, some people are not. You're going to have some kids who are legitimately with their families. You're going to have some who are not. One of the problems they had, which is why Trump made this law, was because they found that a lot of the people who were traveling with kids were not traveling with their own kids. The kids they were traveling with were victims of human trafficking. The children were victims. And because they needed to make sure that they would not be abused by the traffickers, they needed to make sure that they wouldn't be, staying with the people who were illegally trafficking them. They separated them until they could do DNA tests. That was the nature of the child separation policy. Now, that being said, some of them probably were, and I would say almost definitely were, the legitimate children of these families. And it seems to be the case that side of the story is kind of the one that's only being shown to people. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, is the organization now going and trying to find what seems to be the legitimate cases and trying to, well, sue the United States government, meaning your taxpayer money, to give them a whole lot of money for their actions to illegally cross an international border and come into the country because they were arrested. And as they were arrested, they were separated from their traffickers, sometimes their parents, while they were DNA tested. And here we are now. Now, it says here, the U.S. Departments of Justice, Homeland Security, and Health and Human Services are considering payments that could amount to close to $1 million a family. So they're changing the numbers here a bit. They're saying that they were looking at $450,000 per person, but they're also saying $1 million per family. And so I have to see what this means, but it could change based on the family. Of course, a family is more than one person, $450,000 a person who was affected by it, about $1 million per family, they're thinking. Though the final numbers they're saying could shift. Some make it more, some make it less, possibly. Now, this is according again to unnamed sources they say are familiar with the matter. Most of the families that crossed the border illegally from Mexico to seek asylum in the United States included one parent and one child, the people said. Many families would likely get smaller payouts depending on their circumstances, the people also said. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which represents families in one of the suits, has identified about 5,500 children separated at the border over the course of the Trump administration. Keep in mind, folks, among the hundreds of thousands trafficked across our border or illegally crossing on their own, depending on the circumstances, they were able to identify 5,500. The mainstream media mainly says that all of these people are somehow, unaccompanied minors. That's the way the narrative usually is. Out of the hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors, they were able to find 5,500 possibly legitimate cases. Now, on this note, they're, of course, citing numbers that they provided to the government. Now, the number of families eligible under the potential settlement is expected to be even smaller than that, the people said, as government officials aren't sure how many will come forward, they're claiming. Maybe of the 5,500 they've identified, they're not sure how many of them maybe have legitimate cases also. Around 940 claims out of those numbers have so far been filed by the families, according to these unnamed sources. The total potential payout based just on that could be $1 billion or more. Now, folks, this is, of course, taking place as you have hundreds of thousands. Again, in October alone, there were projected to be somewhere around 400,000 illegal aliens crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, including from many countries. This is not just the United States. This is not just Mexico, as we often think with illegal immigration. This is Central America. This is Haiti. This is other continents, people coming across. And people who are crossing the border illegally, the Biden administration has, by law, under the Supreme Court, been ordered to restore Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. The way a lot of them are doing it is they're applying for asylum. The human traffickers, the actual human traffickers, give them guidance on how to apply for asylum using basic claims like, I feel like my life is in danger. I feel that there's a threat in my country. A lot of them don't come from countries, though, where that would be warranted, which is why you have the process of seeing if they're actually eligible for that, if they're eligible for actual asylum. And most of them, in the end, it turns out they're not eligible, hence the idea of having them wait in Mexico rather than in the United States, because when they wait in the United States and they have to show up for these hearings, typically they don't show up. Now, as this is happening, the Biden administration is basically working in an extrajudicial manner. They are violating the Supreme Court's order to restore the Remain in Mexico policy, meaning on one side, the administration is ignoring the law. They are, again, an extrajudicial force at this point. In addition to that, they're actually facilitating the trafficking into the United States. Jen Psaki has said during a press conference, White House press conference, that the United States is, in fact, the Biden administration is, in fact, taking people who are legally crossing into the United States and then continuing to traffic them to other parts of the country to help them resettle. Which means, in addition to being an extrajudicial movement, they're also participating directly in both human trafficking and in an action that violates U.S. law. being illegal immigration. In addition to that, these people are now being told that if they feel offended, if they feel they suffer psychological abuse, that they may be able to sue the United States government for that, which is what this case would set the precedent for. And in addition to that, you also have the issue, folks, that this is happening as American citizens are at a risk of losing their jobs on a very, very large scale. You're talking, 2/3 roughly, or a third of the U.S. workforce possibly could be affected, not lose their jobs, but be affected by this new vaccine mandate they're rolling out. Of those numbers, mixed percentages are wanting to get vaccinated. We see in New York, for example, which we'll go into later, that the police department, about 25% of police in New York could lose their jobs. Americans are facing unemployment on a large scale if they have a moral issue with getting forced vaccines. And vaccines only under the narrative, if you take the altered definition they've used to call these vaccines. And given the situation as well, we also have a large financial crisis. We also have the debt ceiling getting hit. We also have inflation. We also have the real estate crisis coming from China, the shipping crisis, and other things. And while all of this is happening and hundreds of thousands of people are legally entering the country, violating American law, violating American sovereignty, as that is happening, these same individuals are wanting us to pay them hundreds of millions, possibly over $1 billion, because they feel offended by the U.S. law.
He pays you to break the law, and then he bails you out, remember, if you break the law. And didn't he also stop building the border wall and then build the border wall around his own house? Mm-hmm. And then he put the kids in cages, the same cages that he got mad at Trump for putting people in. Those happened to be the same cages he built when he was the VP. And so I think he spies on your bank account if you haven't broken the law. And then he puts $500,000 in your bank account for breaking the law. And then he fires you from work and then pays you not to work. And then he flies illegals into New York in the dead of night and says it's actually not the dead of the night. It's actually early in the morning. Oh, my God. This guy's already shattered the all-time American record for illegal entries, and then he blamed Trump for that. Now, there was a reason we all remember why we had to separate families, because Donald Trump was following the letter of the law. You cannot hold adults and minors in the same facility legally, and you can't hold minors for more than 21 days. Plus, you had to separate them to see if they were actually parents or if these were kids just getting trafficked, and it did have a very strong deterrent effect. Do you remember when there was a guy who came into the country, I think it was like 11 times illegally, and then murdered an American woman in a sanctuary city, Kate Steinle? She sued San Francisco and the federal government for damages.
Her family.
And the federal government wouldn't pay her. Mm-hmm. They said no, but they're going to pay an illegal to come over here. We've been separated from our families. We were told we couldn't see our grandparents. We couldn't see our parents. Right. We couldn't visit them in a nursing home. We couldn't say goodbye to them on their deathbeds. Couldn't hold a funeral. Couldn't go see them in church. What do we get? A check for $2,000? And these people come in here and they get $500,000? This is crazy. This is crazy.
Well, folks, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, especially given the point on another note, too, that this was an order from the President of the United States, written law. In other words, this is written law in a country. You can say that you feel offended when law is enforced, right? You can claim that you're offended, that you feel you had psychological damage because law was enforced, but it's the law. If the police come to your door and arrest your dad, which would be a terrible situation, but let's say your father or your brother or your cousin commits a crime, the police come to your door and arrest them. That may be a traumatic experience for you. But if you violate the law, typically you will be arrested. And typically through the process of being arrested, you will be separated from normal society. The arresting process typically separates you. And people now are unhappy because they were separated because of the process of being arrested for committing a crime. And so this will also set an interesting precedent, because is it okay to violate the law, essentially, and expect to not be arrested? And then if you are arrested, claim that the process of being separated from people as you're arrested that process itself is somehow psychologically damaging.
You cannot allow this to be framed as Democrat versus Republican. You cannot allow this to be framed as an immigration question, and you cannot let this be framed about separation. This has nothing to do at all with immigration. So you don't want to get dragged down that hole. This is about draining the power of America, which is because this is so far left. There's a reason behind this. If illegals get $500,000 per illegal, we are done. Because that means they can keep doing this, and this is how you drain a country. You're basically opening up the drain. Turning on the faucet, everything goes out. This is not about immigration, because this is the craziest idea. It goes beyond that. I thought it was a joke. You were tweeting
yesterday.
You were reading it off Twitter, and I'm going, that can't be right. This sounds like something that you would get on a far right website that you would have to check 100 times to see if it's true.
This is like ad libs for liberalism. How bad
Wall
could
Street
you get
Journal.
it?
On the issue of the separation and paying people, families who were separated, the first thing I would say is it's a reflection of how the left feels about the American citizen, right? So if you're an American citizen and you commit a crime, you were separated from your family, and sometimes for a very long time, and sometimes they put you in prison. There is no money for that, and there shouldn't be, but this idea that people who break immigration law, come into the country illegally, breaking federal law, get a huge check of $450,000 to do so, nobody else gets to do that if you're a citizen. The other thing is there are tens of thousands of unaccompanied minors who are voluntarily separated from their parents in El Salvador, in Guatemala, and they were sent alone on this journey, and they were already separated. And so this is just, it's a way to, as Greg said, drain the system, but it's also a reflection of the disdain that the left has for the American taxpayer and how they think that you should be paying for rule breakers, not just inside the United States, but coming into the country as well.